Welcome to With You Podcast.
Where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
It's been a good day. I've had a good day. I'm doing some course prep, and it's exciting. I like that.
That's good. I'm glad you're having a good day.
It is. It's something different. It's on leadership, and I'm reading all new things and just very excited about new possibilities. Now, after I teach a class, I might not be that way because then I have to grade.
Yeah, that's always a downer.
Yeah. And you've been getting ready for teaching as well.
Yes, I'm teaching a doula training workshop this weekend. So getting all my binders together and lots of materials to hand out. And
I looked through some of them. It's fascinating.
Oh, did you? What did you find out?
Could I take the class? I was just like, there's so much I don't know. I don't want to talk about details.
Wait,
It's not that kind of
what
podcast.
parts were you reading?
Well, just like the elevator speech and thinking about how you do an elevator speech as a doula.
That's the business part of it. Like
Yeah.
doulas, when they get certified, then usually start a solo business. So it's kind of how do you tell people what you do in a short amount of time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we both, like, in the different organizations we work for, I think it's good to have an elevator pitch. And so it got me thinking about that, which kept me from preparing for my class.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to help.
But it seems like you go through not just facilitating birth, but as a businesswoman, from marketing to contracts to, it was just really cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of a glimpse into your life.
Oh, I'm glad you learned something new about what I do.
Yeah. It's more complicated than just going, here's how you push the baby out.
It's a lot more complicated.
So
most things are.
Well, and I think I'm in a good mood because we had a wonderful weekend too.
It was Father's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what did you enjoy? Yes, it was all about David.
No, we celebrated your cultural heritage.
Wait, how?
We went to the Highland Games.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I don't know what time frame I was thinking about, but yeah, we did go to the Scottish Highland Games, our third year in a row.
Yeah, it was so fun. We saw big people throwing heavy things.
Yep.
That was, and it was just fun. We got to sit there, and the crowd goes crazy for the caber toss.
Yes,
Did
you
I
got
say
it
that?
right.
Oh,
Yep,
man.
the caber toss, not the tabor toss.
I always want it to be, because it looks like a telephone pole, so it should be a
it
tabor.
does. And and they're all in kilts, and it was hot, and they're throwing heavy things all day.
Yeah, and if you've never seen a caber toss, you have not lived.
It's super fun. And then at the end, they eat and throw haggis.
Yeah, which I think we're thinking about doing next year, right? We're going to lean into the cultural.
We talk about a lot of crazy things. We always want to participate.
I would love to see you just huck a haggis.
Yeah, it is actually called the haggis hurl.
The haggis hurl,
Yeah,
that's right.
and the ladies do that, and then the men have an eating competition, which I think I'd much rather throw haggis than eat it.
Haggis is good.
That's
So
what you
why
say.
is it I like all of your cultural foods?
Well, you're just surprisingly more adventurous about eating like organs and stuff.
They're so unctuous. It's great. I like it. So,
Yeah.
But it was a lovely time. We had lovely weather, and we actually lived out what we talked about last week. We slowed down. It was a time where we sat for like 9 hours watching people throw heavy things.
I know, because we did talk about, the idea of slowing down and getting off the busy pace in our last week's podcast, and people told us they noticed that we were not experts in the subject.
No. And we kept on going, uh-oh.
So, yeah, we did practice that by sitting at the Highland Games for 9 hours or something. We just pitched a tent, like a canopy thing.
Yep.
It sat our chairs out and did nothing but sat there.
Yeah.
We weren't looking at our phones. We actually snuck books. Both of us snuck books into the bag.
We did.
Thinking we would read, but we didn't. We just
we socialized, got to help a neighbor out. Don't know who she was, but we had a lovely time putting up their tent.
Well,
Um,
yes, you did. You were helpful in
you helped
helping them
too.
rate well, yeah, I tried. I couldn't really reach.
Well, yeah, putting up the tent, your hands were way up
Yeah.
and couldn't quite get there, but yeah, it was. I was surprised at how well we kind of downshifted and just sat there.
Yeah, we were trying to learn take a spoon of our own medicine.
Yeah, so I think for this year we can tick that off the box. We've done
Yeah,
that.
there it was. That was our slow day.
We just move right past it. What's next, and what are we going to
Mm.
do? And it kind of is what we're going to talk about today. Kind of the flip side of um, slowing down.
Yeah, well, not really. I mean, they're really
No,
closely related.
don't you think it's the
So
opposite of
we're
slowing down?
talking about the idea of waiting
Yeah,
and the seasons of waiting that is just part of the human experience. And
yeah,
it was actually stimulated by a sermon.
yep,
We had a guest speaker. Hey, Emily, it was
yeah,
really great in church. And while we were listening, we were just kind of looking at each other like, oh, this would be great to talk about in depth because it was Pentecost Sunday and she was talking about the waiting and how we're all living in this season of waiting in big and small ways.
yeah,
And it's such a part of life and seasons we've gone through and seasons we're going through now,
yeah.
and so we thought,
Mhm.
yeah, I think everybody will relate to waiting for something.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking it was the opposite because slowing down is kind of like for us, especially, we said we do a lot of that to ourselves, the hurry, and we choose to live into that.
Right.
Waiting is kind of thrust upon us
Yeah.
a lot of the times. It's an external thing
Yeah.
outside of our control.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, it can be a slow time, like we were
Yeah,
talking about slowing down, but I think you're talking about the intentionality because we were talking about intentionally looking for ways to slow the pace, get off the crazy train.
yeah,
And we're talking more about seasons of waiting that are outside our control. That's not our choice.
yeah.
Often might be waiting for something that we're choosing to wait for. You put a loaf of bread in the oven. You don't like to wait, it smells so good. You want to eat it.
That's true.
But
Or Christmas
you can't,
morning,
a
you
lot
buy
of,
presents and you're
yeah, and that's
waiting.
kind of the anticipation of waiting. But there's a lot of things in our life that we're waiting for that we can't control whether or not we're going to get to the ending or how long it's going to take.
Yeah. And so we thought we would talk about that today.
Yeah.
And I think we all experience waiting, but I'm trying to think. I don't think I
Yeah.
know anyone that enjoys it.
No.
I mean,
Uh,
anticipation, some people like
yeah.
anticipation. There's that song about ketchup of like Heinz
What?
anticipation, and you're holding the ketchup
Oh,
upside down and you're waiting for it to come out. You're waiting for it to come out. And the
that's
anticipation,
right.
they
That
had a
was
whole
a
jingle in the
brilliant
70s, I
ad
think.
campaign. They leaned
Yeah.
into how slow their product comes out of its container.
Because it drives everybody crazy.
Yeah.
And they made it a
Yeah.
thing. And it
Yeah.
was Heinz
Like
anticipation.
worth the wait.
Man, I am susceptible to marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. You always
That's,
remember those ads. It's funny.
I would make a joke, but my mom listens to this, so I don't think I will. I was going to say I was raised by
Well, there you
television.
go. I was gonna say it. Now I'm gonna say it.
So my executive functioning might not be all that great.
So besides ketchup, what are some things you've
I
had to wait for in your life? Like, what
uh,
pops to mind of some hard waiting times?
I think just recently, I think for my students, they're waiting on their licensing now acknowledgement. So
Mhm.
they do 2 years of grad school, 2 years of clinical work. So it's like 4 years, and then they submit all this paperwork, and then they just wait.
Mhm.
Um, and for years, I was on the licensing board. So then their waiting would be calling me up of like, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen?
Yeah.
So that's the most forefront thing of
Yeah.
a process that happens that I didn't have any control over, but people were waiting on a letter from me.
Yeah. And it happens every year for your students. You're always
Always
part
having
of that.
people waiting.
Mhm.
For me personally, I think it was waiting for our first child's birth. That was the hardest thing.
Yeah. For you?
Uh,
Tell me about it.
I don't wanna. What? How about for you, honey?
I wanna
Yeah.
hear more about how hard my pregnancy was for you.
I don't want to play this game anymore. I mean, I think it was just wanting, because as a dad,
Yeah.
I'll answer it seriously. As a dad, I was really kind of envious. Like you had everything happening in your body, and I was kind of a passive, well, active bystander.
Yes.
Sometimes passive,
Yeah.
sometimes active.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until he was born that I could kind of touch him and actively participate.
Yeah.
So it was kind of waiting. It wasn't waiting through the birth pains like we hear in scripture of analogy, but it was this, I don't have anything to do. I'm kind of ancillary to this, and I'm waiting to be part of it a little bit more actively.
Yeah.
How was that? Was that a good
Sure.
recovery?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you were very helpful during my during my pregnancy and my 2 weeks overdue. It was a long wait. But
Right?
yeah,
Coming
no.
home of like, any cramps? Anything? No? All right. Well, let's go for a walk.
I know. Well, and that I mean, that's obviously a huge part of my life besides my own babies, what
Well,
is waiting for
yeah.
other people's babies and being out of control for how long that's gonna take and
Yeah.
how to encourage them in the waiting. That I mean, I think when people think about times of waiting, that is one that pops up a lot, but besides just the fact that my pregnancies went into extra innings.
You were, yes, you were
uh,
just a really good nurturing
That's
person.
right. I made good homes. They
Yeah.
didn't wanna leave, which is still true. But besides that, we had some trouble along the way. We
Yeah.
had some miscarriages, and I remember that time, in the not knowing, like, was I ever gonna get pregnant
Yeah.
again, or was I ever gonna hold the baby in the end? It's amazing how that just kind of overtakes your consciousness. And a lot of people say this, like when you're thinking about something or waiting for something, it seems like everybody else is getting it except for you.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like everywhere I turned, everybody was pregnant. Everybody was pregnant. Like
Yeah.
everybody had a baby bump. And it just like highlights, so
Yeah.
and we'll talk more about how to handle that feeling of, being left out or other people
Mhm.
getting what you're waiting for. But I
Well, it
remember
goes,
that being highlighted and almost feeling repulsed
yeah.
by the sight of other people having what I didn't have for a while. And I had to really consciously face that
Yeah.
and learn how to like walk into it.
Well, and it's all, I mean, I think it was all that we were thinking about, all that you were thinking about, or a lot of it. It was front of mind.
Mhm.
And so then you see it everywhere. I'm
Right.
pretty sure not everyone was
You
pregnant.
think? I think everyone in Georgia was pregnant. Everyone.
I don't think that was the case, but I
Yeah.
do know it was that case for me too. When you were pregnant, I would just see pregnant women everywhere, because I was attending to it. And
Yeah.
when it wasn't part of our anticipation or what we were wanting, didn't think about it, didn't notice it. So it's
Yeah.
interesting, the perception piece of
Right.
how that goes with waiting.
Right. How it changes what you think is going on in the rest of the world. It's
Yeah.
just highlighted. Yeah. And yeah, obviously my work life, I'm waiting on babies in labor a lot, and
Yeah.
it's very much outside our control. And I mean, just recently, I was at 2 births, 2 days apart, and the timelines of those births went completely flip-flopped opposite of what
Yeah. They were
I would
like
have
4
expected.
weeks apart, and then they both gave birth on the same
Almost the
week.
same day, they went into labor on the same day, and then the one who was a first-time mom went super, super fast, and the one who was a third-time mom took a really long time, and I was present for both, but, just I had no idea what was about to happen.
Yeah. You live in that space a lot, and I
I
remember
do.
when you were just a newborn doula, like you would shut life down and
Yeah.
wait that way of like it was like I got to be ready to go. Now you're a seasoned doula, and
Mhm.
we still do life, and sometimes we go to a restaurant, and then I leave by myself because you've left before the appetizers to go to the birth. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting shift. I think
Mhm.
it's where we're going to get to, that there's different ways of waiting.
Mhm.
I think another one for us, uh, was me proposing to you. That you were waiting like, "What are you doing, buddy?"
Yeah, I think we just kind of didn't handle communicating about that well.
No.
Yeah.
And it left you not
Yeah,
knowing.
there was a time of not knowing where I was starting to tell you, "I'm just gonna move to another state."
Yeah. All the while,
Yeah,
I
and
knew the plan,
right,
and I was
right.
waiting to
We could have done
propose.
that differently.
Yeah, it probably would have been better for us, but
Yeah,
I think people do wait for, like, a relational status, whether getting into a relationship with someone, dating, looking for that person, or looking to end and trying to figure out an ending process to
yeah,
relationship.
yeah. I do think relationally that is a big period of waiting that's really hard to handle is especially when you're looking for a companion or hoping for a really close, intimate relationship and you're not there yet and you can't force that to happen. There's a lot of not knowing,
Yeah,
am I going to be alone or how do I know when I've met the right person? I think that's something a lot of people experience
yeah.
in the waiting.
And I think the last one that comes up for a lot that we've waited for is healing for friends, family. If someone is sick, and the belief that healing can happen, whether through medical science or faith or a combination of that. And when it doesn't, it's kind of like the big why question and kind of waiting, will it happen? I don't know, but I'm holding on hope to that. That's a really hard waiting.
Yeah. Well, that for sure was the hardest time of waiting in my life personally.
Yeah.
Um, was walking with my dad through his illness
Mm.
because it was such a long time. When you enter something like that, you have no idea
Yeah.
what the timeline will look like. And dad, I mean, as you know, had a disease that was like Lou Gehrig's, so it was a decline of all of his systems in his body
Yep.
and started slow and we didn't know what was going on. It progressed. It took it was more than 20 years
Yeah. It
that he
started in
was.
'94, so right at the beginning of our
Yeah. So a
relationship.
really different timeline. Something like Lou Gehrig's usually progresses faster, but this was a different. He went to lots of different doctors to try to get it diagnosed, and I think it was eventually just called multiple system atrophy or something,
Yeah.
basically just telling you, yeah, all of the things
Yeah.
are
This is
going
what's
offline.
happening.
But yeah, walking with him through the waiting of that was probably the hardest thing I think
Yeah.
either of us have experienced because it was, he was hoping for healing
Yeah. And we
or
all were praying for that.
yeah, whether it was from God, whether the medical community figured out what was going on. And he was a medical person himself, so he was studying and researching and couldn't find answers for why, couldn't find answers for even just finding comfort
Yeah.
in his, physical pain and all of that. So walking with somebody with and I never
Chronic illness,
yeah,
terminal illness.
chronic illness, um, and watching my mom, be his caretaker, something like that on this earth, I think is one of the hardest things that
Yeah.
we can do.
Yeah. And there was fits and starts too. I remember you going out to Colorado to say goodbye, and dad was like, "Yeah, nope,
Not yet.
not yet."
He was
Okay.
around for another couple of years after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that not knowing, I think we wanna talk about, because that's the hardest part of
Mhm.
where you think something's going to happen, and I think that spiritually too, a lot of people struggle with faith about, "I feel like God has promised certain things, and it's not happening." I mean, that's where the lament literature comes from, of,
Mhm.
like, how do we hold both things, the hope and the difficulty of waiting?
Yeah.
How do we hold them at the same time?
Yeah.
Am I jumping ahead?
No, no,
Oh,
I was just thinking, yeah, I liked that, the words of, like, standing between hopefulness and helplessness,
mm,
because I think a lot of times in the waiting, when it's, an ending we can't predict or control, it
yeah.
feels just like helplessness. It feels we don't like not being in control,
No,
especially
not at
you and
all.
I.
Oh, man, that is not cool.
So the helplessness can feel really debilitating.
Yeah,
So where do you still find hope, even when you can't control it and not have so much hope that you're not being realistic
right.
either. right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what can you have? I mean, I think the hopelessness and the hopefulness in waiting is what can you have control over, or what can you have agency about? And I talk with people. I don't do this well in my life, but I talk with people about it.
Mhm.
I try of like, okay, what can I control? I can, and we would tell our kids this: you can't control what anyone else does, but you do have an ability to control your response
Yeah.
or have an influence. So, how do I live in hopelessness? How do I live in the tension between um, what I hope for and what the timing is?
Yeah.
And my attitude, it's hard, but
Yeah.
there is ability to like, I'm going to choose to
Yeah. Like,
enter into this.
how do you live well when you're on hold? That's what it feels like. You know, when you're on hold
Yeah.
and the music is playing on a phone and it
Oh,
like
yeah.
and especially when it was with like back when we had cable and, and you'd be on the phone for you could be on the phone for an hour.
Yeah.
And what do you do with your life, like in a bigger sense, how do you live well? Who do you want to be in those times you're on hold? Because I can tend to just live in this frozen middle thing where you're just kind of like not making a move. And I see that for people waiting for jobs. We've walked our kids through that season of finding employment.
Yeah.
I think people can get frozen in the wait. Well, things will be, I'll really move forward once I get working, or I'll
Yeah.
really move forward. I'll really do these things once I do this, or once I do this, or once that comes through.
Yeah.
But we don't know how long that period's going to be. So are you just going to just live in this kind of in between frozen state?
Yeah, I've been reading a lot on Teddy Roosevelt and love him. And he talks about this of like spectatoring, you don't have any influence on anything going on. You're watching it, but you're not part of it. And his famous speech, he talks about being in the arena of like it's the people that are muddy, that are messy, that are maybe even wounded and doing something
Mhm.
that really fosters hope that it might not give you the outcome, but you are in the process and doing
Mhm.
that. And his life was that way. He had losses. Lost elections, lost his wife and his mom on the same day, Valentine's Day, 1890s. Um, and he would go and do something to deal with his depression and
Mhm.
deal with his sorrow. And I think, we need to look at what can we do.
Yeah.
I think about queuing up, right? Like we queue a lot when we're traveling, and
Yeah.
waiting for the
Getting in a
airplane
line.
and
Yeah.
getting in a line, and it can be very frustrating.
Mhm. I
Different
don't like a
cultures
long line.
different cultures
Nope.
line up differently. The Germans, it's very orderly. In other cultures, it's not so orderly. And I think it's the attitude that you have. How are you entering into that? That
Yeah.
shifts the experience.
Well, why? So, I feel like we talk about waiting as such a normal part of life, and
Yeah.
I feel like God gives us clues in nature as to our experience. Like there are cycles of waiting in nature and dormancy of trees and
Yeah.
seasons and stuff, and
Hmm.
we it's just part of life. So why is it so hard? Why is it so hard?
Yeah. Well, I think Pascal, the philosopher, says
There you go.
waiting. I know. I actually did some reading on
Okay.
this. I've had some
Just
time. I
teeing that
told
up
you
for you.
it's a good day. That waiting shows that you care about it. Like
Mhm.
there's a worthwhileness that it lets you know you're alive. It lets you know that it's valuable. That how we wait and the frustration around waiting. So like you living in the Midwest, we talk about the weather. Winter, you have to wait for the color to emerge
Mhm.
because that gives you such joy and you know you're alive because of that. It gives you the power and the strength to wait through the barrenness of the
Yeah,
Midwest winter.
but okay. But so
I know you don't like that
no,
analogy.
but I mean, okay, so I get that. I like that analogy, but I feel like in that one, we know that the spring will come, and that is the joy of the cyclical seasons. What about the unknown? I think there's
Oh,
something
like
in
illness.
humanity that does not like the not knowing, the unknown, the
Yeah.
unpredictable. There's something in us that really wants answers all
Yeah.
the time. We
Yeah.
want answers in everything we do. I mean, it's like our life's work to find answers for things,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
And science is about that. We want to understand. We could just live our lives happily, just floating along and not knowing, right?
Yeah. What's the fun in that?
Right, but I mean, that's humans, we wanna know.
Yeah.
And, okay, so I didn't do the research, but I heard about this study on a different podcast. They mentioned this study that I thought was relevant because it was fascinating to me. It was a study about 10 years ago from the University of London
Hmm.
where they they gave some people. I can't explain the whole methodology of the study, but the bottom line is some people knew 100% sure they were gonna get an electric shock, and in other rooms, there was 50-50. 50% chance you might get a shock, 50% chance, no shock, you'll be fine. The people who had the 50-50 chance were way significantly more stressed out than the
Mm,
people who knew they were gonna experience pain.
interesting.
And the study kinda concluded that, like, we are way more comfortable with knowing what's gonna happen even if it's painful
Yeah.
than the not knowing. The, like, "I might have pain, I might not. It might come today, it might come tomorrow."
Yeah. Well,
Right?
it goes to that anticipation is exciting and it's also overwhelming. I
Mhm.
think there's a marriage and family therapist named Virginia Satir, and she goes, most people are more comfortable with the pain that they know. So yeah, things are hard, but I at least know that this
Yeah.
difficulty in our relationship, in our
Yeah.
marriage, with
Yeah.
our kids, than trying to do something different and not know what the outcome is going to be. And
Mhm.
so this is a huge challenge for me as a therapist because I am trying to invite people into the unknown, that they've had a balance and it's horrible. They don't like it, but yet it's known. And so there's a sense of comfort there. And asking you, hey, I know that's painful. This might be better. It might be worse, but can we try doing something different to see? And I'll be with you. So the thing that shifts there is being together in it rather than being alone in it. I think in solitude we're going to stay with whatever is happening even though it's painful and uncomfortable. I think it takes another for us to really step out of that. And I would be interested in that study to see if it was individually, like if there was someone as a comfort person with them,
Mm.
because your job is not to take away pain. And the birth process is unknown, but there's a comfort in providing comfort care and being present with. It's not changing the outcome or answering the when question, but you're with them.
Mhm.
And that seems to mitigate the pain in the waiting, the difficulty in the waiting.
Mhm. I mean, and there's lots of layers to that because I think what does mitigate it, at least in that case of the pain of labor, is having reassurance from somebody who's been there before, which could apply to a lot of things. Having something to do, which maybe is like a distraction sometimes, but maybe sometimes actually has some efficacy and makes the process more efficient.
Yeah.
So there's some things we can do, but in the case of waiting over things we really can't control, I
Like
feel like,
illness. Yeah.
yeah, like illness, we can't bring about healing necessarily. There's just some pains that we can't really take away. I feel like there's different ways of waiting.
Yeah.
And some of it is fighting, like we might try to muscle our way out of it. We might try to find an ending or create a different ending or right?
Or hurry it along.
Or
I know
hurry it along.
that's how I boil water. I stand there and I look at it and I'm like, come on, boil. And it
Yeah.
doesn't make it go any faster.
No.
Actually, a watch pot seldom boils
Y y
is the
right.
proverb. And it's that idea like you try to force it, you try to hurry, and it makes time go slower, I think, actually.
It actually does. They've showed that
That's
time
sense.
is the perception of time can definitely be altered
Yeah.
by how we pay attention to it. Um Yeah, and sometimes when we're waiting and that's the kind of the act of fighting it, but we can also just distract ourselves. I think that tends to be sometimes what I do. Even now, we're going through a little bit of waiting in
We are
in a
not
in
pregnant.
a
I
no, no,
just
no,
want
no, 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 no.
to.
In a project that we're working on that
Yeah.
we need some feedback for, and we're just kind of waiting for the next steps. And that's a small thing, sort of, but to us it feels big, and we don't know when we're going to hear the next steps or what the feedback's going to be. And I was told very wisely by my daughter-in-law that maybe I need to doula myself through this, meaning like find the same things I tell other people, distract yourself, take care of yourself. So
Yeah.
we thought it would be good to talk about some ways we can live well in the waiting that we can't control. Because there are some things we can do rather than just helplessly, living in this in between
Yeah. Well,
and getting anxious.
how are you numbing yourself? The one last bad way of like, because I think a lot of people do this. It's well, I don't know if you're doing this, but like phones, scrolling, doom scrolling,
Mhm.
or um,
Yeah.
kind of getting on. I don't know what is it, TikTok. I don't know anything about that, but
Yeah, but I mean, if just scrolling on the phone mindlessly, consuming, I don't know,
yeah,
news or playing games or whatever can be a way to just kind of shut down that thinking brain. To
distracts you.
distract. So I've learned in some of my seasons of waiting because would you say I'm a pretty optimistic, pretty upbeat person generally?
Oh man, let's think about this.
No, seriously.
Yes, you are. You are the most even keeled. Like even when you're waiting, you don't look distressed, except for the last few
I
weeks.
know.
But
See, that's what I've discovered that I think I am pretty, like, usually pretty optimistic,
uh,
pretty even, but I have found that my shadow side can go to just really going to the worst case
yeah,
scenarios. And
catastrophize. We've had
yeah.
phone calls where I'm like, "What has happened to Tara?"
Yeah, and I'm just thinking the worst, and I think everybody has a tendency to do that in some instances, like your teenager is 10 minutes past curfew and your brain is like, "Oh, they're in a ditch on the side of the road and, they've been in an accident, they're at the hospital." You can Your brain wants to kind of think about what if,
Yeah.
and I have found that sometimes in the waiting, that's where I go. And then I have to
Mm.
very actively bring myself back to something more productive.
How do you do that?
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay, because I think a lot of people do that of kind of go to, and I wonder if it's like really caring about it
Mhm.
leads to yeah, I'm not hearing I care so much. And so it's easier if I think about the bad things that can happen because then when they don't, oh, it's so much better.
Yeah.
And if they do, well, I've already prepared myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Catastrophizing.
think that's a self-protective thing that we do.
And
And then
I think it happens mostly. We have friends that talk about people that are pre and post,
mm,
and it's usually some kind of loss, some kind of pain. If it's before you've had anything bad happen, it's harder to catastrophize
mhm,
because things have kind of always gone that way. It's once you've had some pain, some suffering,
mm,
then it becomes harder to tune out those shadow side or that voice in your head that, well, bad things do happen and they
yeah.
have happened. And um, it's hard to have hope sometimes through that.
Yeah. And if it's waiting for something that you don't have, like, like a relationship or a baby or a job, or you can really focus on that loss or that lack and feel sort of alone in that. I think that's a way a lot of people go with that anxiety of like, this will never happen to me. I'm the one that doesn't have this while other people do. I think
Yeah.
that's one, um, sort of not great direction that people can go in that passive waiting.
Yeah, the comparison
Hmm.
is miserable. We've talked about this before, but it's a season where some of our adult kids are living with us because of the financial situations, all those type of things, and we're waiting for them. to do the next thing. And we shared
Mhm.
with some friends internationally of like, oh, our kids are still living with us. And it's not a bad thing, but it was just kind of the waiting for it to happen. And they're like, what a blessing. And the cultural experience was very different of like, oh, you have bonus time.
Mhm.
And so I think the perspective of so much wanting the next thing to happen or the outcome or the lack of comparison of, oh, the other 20 somethings are doing this and ours aren't. We get distracted by the comparison and miss out on maybe some of the beautiful things of waiting that our friends have reminded us
Yeah.
of.
Well, and that's a good segue into active waiting, David. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. My job here is done. I think I will take a nap.
Yeah, because I think the difference is passive waiting, you're just not really moving forward, or you're and maybe that's sometimes by your own inertia or your lack of doing, and sometimes it's out of your control, but it's also a mind frame. And in active waiting, I think it's focusing on what can I do right now? What is how can I make the most of what I do have? And like with the kids,
Yeah.
when we really focus on this really is bonus time,
Yeah.
and focusing on what we can do together and the memories we can make together and the ways we can live well together.
And what we value and what's important. And
Mhm.
it shifts it
Yeah.
to, oh, yes, we're still waiting and still hoping for them. And we're enjoying the moment of like, hey, here's a moment that we can enjoy. It's like the conversation I have if I'm waiting in the grocery line and it's the long line, I'll talk to the lady behind me, and what a great time to have a conversation.
Sure.
It
That sounds
makes
like you.
it makes the time go by faster, and so it's like here's an opportunity to get to know someone versus I'm going to be here for another 15 minutes
Mhm.
because that guy just dropped all his pennies that he's paying his grocery bill on the floor.
Yeah. So you're talking about maybe leaning into it a little bit, and this resonates with me with labor, because a lot of what does help when somebody's in pain is stopping the resistance and the fighting it and leaning into, this is where I am,
Yeah.
and how do I just lean in and like accept that this is my reality right now,
Hmm.
and how can I connect with the people around me during this? Who do I want to be while I'm feeling this way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another active waiting,
Mhm.
for me is listening. So it's thinking about even our spiritual disciplines. There's lots of psalms, lots of scriptures about wait upon the Lord,
Mhm.
and wait and listen and look, and it's slowing down and reprioritizing, and that it's a spiritual discipline. I'm not great at it,
Mhm.
but it's shifts it from being something imposed on me. So that kind of leaning
Yeah.
in can also be a spiritual discipline. I know I stopped this prayer, but I used to pray for patience, and that usually meant you had to got
Classic.
opportunities to wait.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh nope, I don't need that anymore. I'm a very patient person. I don't need that. But thinking about it's teaching us a lesson. It's a thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's not a pause in the things that are we want to have happen. It's a moment in and of itself. And I think that's another piece of leaning into it.
Yeah. Well, and what you said reminded me too that it is about that perspective of time as well, because it feels like forever. And something that always stuck with me, and I think you remember this, when I worked for the pastor of the church that we attended in California,
Hmm.
and it was a very, very large church, and I would do the sermon outlines for the pastor, and put them into graphics and stuff that would go in the bulletins. And he did a whole long sermon series on Joseph,
Mm.
and I made a timeline because this it was such a visual for me that I've always remembered. And you know about Joseph getting betrayed by his brothers.
No, what happened?
Am I saying the right
Yeah, no,
character?
I
Okay.
was I was just playing like, "Tell me the story."
Okay, like you never heard it. So I all of a sudden have this moment like, did I say
No, Joseph, yeah.
okay? So he was, betrayed. He was sold into slavery and eventually put in prison for something he didn't do. And it seemed like so not fair,
Yeah.
right? And he's in prison after he had done everything right, according to the story in the Bible. And
Well, he did taunt
I've,
his brothers a little bit.
yeah,
There was that part, but
nobody likes the favorite one. Um, and I wish I had looked it back up to remember the number of years, but I think it was like 12 years he was in prison or something,
sure.
like not just a few months, like a long time
Yeah.
living in prison. Really, probably really terrible conditions, I imagine.
Yeah.
Um, and it seems like you would give up hope, like living in that kind of situation,
Yeah.
especially in an unfair circumstance. And then you look at when he came out because he was freed by the king. Who was he? The king. Anyway,
We'll say the king.
anyway, so he was restored and he was given leadership in the home, and then eventually was a leader of the country. And when you look at the time that he was in charge, and eventually restoration with his brothers and all of that, beautiful
Yeah.
part of the story. But the timeline, as far as number of years, was huge. That he was living in, with resources and with everything he needed compared to that, and made that time in prison, when you look at that timeline, actually,
Yeah.
physically, look so small. And
Yeah.
it doesn't negate the suffering he probably went through, but I think it helps when I look back at times of
Mhm.
waiting too, that it felt so overwhelming and so long. And it is when you don't know when it's going to end. But when you can zoom out and you can see the bigger picture, it
Yeah.
feels like that. Not always does it make sense, but it just gives you perspective on the timeline and how that was a small part of the puzzle that was shaping you.
Yeah. And it was not useless time. So he
Yeah.
was in prison, but he was making connections with the thought leaders of the day, and he
Mhm.
ended up being in a position of authority. But it was those 12 years he was learning in that cross-cultural
Yeah, sorry, don't
experience.
correct us if we're wrong on the numbers. It's
But yeah, whatever the time
Yeah.
period was, it was, I think sometimes we think waiting is useless time
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
empty time. And even that story, the time that he was in prison was influential time. And so again, that leaning into it of you are waiting for something, we are waiting for something, but life is not on pause.
Yeah.
There's space not to get distracted and not care about that or wait for it, but how are you waiting? What's the active thing that you
Yeah.
are doing? How can you respond?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we both thought about some of those things
yeah.
that are good, healthy, and active ways to be in waiting. And I kind of categorized them because I thought this is a good way for my brain to think about it into rhythms, glimmers, and anchors. So that's just
Ooh,
categories.
that's
So
kind of nice. And
rhythms,
it's
it's
not
not alliteration.
alliteration. I think that's one of the first times. I like it.
I have a problem. Yeah, so I didn't try to give it any fancy, memorable thing. I just thought this helps me think about active and helpful and productive ways to be who I want to be in those waiting
Yeah.
times. And the first is good for any like healthy human lifestyles, just finding good rhythms,
Yeah.
um, rhythms and routines that kind of give your life some sort of,
Mhm.
um, I want to say anchor, but that's not what I'm talking about. Um,
Rhythms gives regularity. It
mhm,
gives you kind of um, demarcation. So I
yeah,
think about the rhythms of nature back to your comment of
yeah,
it's things when we plant, we don't get to eat right away. The plant has to go through a maturation process, and there's anchor points around that. And you have to water, and there needs to be sunlight, and you have to nurture. All of those things are rhythms in the care of that waiting for the produce to happen.
yeah.
And you're speaking about rhythms for your body, for your heart, for your relationships
Yeah,
that anchor you.
because we always do worse in our response when we're low on our resources,
Yeah,
when we
that's true.
haven't met our basic needs.
Yeah.
And I think this has come up in lots of things we've talked about. It's lessons we've learned the hard way.
Yes, yes.
So maintaining those rhythms is really helpful for being in a place to be not anxious and not focusing on the lack and all of that. So nourishing your body and your soul
Yep.
whatever that looks like for you.
Yep.
Like for us, it's those walks, like the walks several times a week that we can count on, that it's just like we will put other things aside to do that. It's good relationally, it's good physically for our body, but also finding some grounding rituals that just make you feel connected to things. And also, when you're waiting, you're not seeing an end result. So I know you say this with your work too,
Mhm.
being a therapist, you don't always see that the end result or something tied up neatly in a
Yeah.
bow. So finding things you can do in your life that you do see growth, or you do see, a product, like
Mm.
growing things in the garden, cooking and having a beautiful meal at the end of it, reading a book that you can actually finish,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and for me on the academic side, I was just talking with my buddy Mark and asking about what his rhythm is about writing, because writing is not a fun process for most of us. And he was saying his rhythm is every day writing at least a page. And a lot of authors, a lot of writers say this of, and you can throw that page away. It may be something you can use, it may not be, but the
Mm,
process of doing it, even
yeah,
while you're waiting, if you have another manuscript out or you're waiting for the ideas or you're trying to get through writer's block, um, doing something
yeah,
of writing, and it might not be anything that you can use, but that process will eventually bring forth something. And
yeah.
it's practicing. I mean, there's these sayings like fake it till you make it. That's not what we're talking about. It's how do I get into habits and patterns of interaction that will possibly lead to an outcome. I don't know. And so we're still living in that not knowing, but it gives us a sense
Well,
of
and it's
agency.
it's giving you momentum too. It's getting out of inertia because,
Yeah.
an object at rest stays at
Yeah.
rest. So it's that momentum can really help the spirits too.
And time. I mean, I've heard you say this many times of like women waiting for the cramps to happen and then the contractions. And the more you focus on it, the longer the time
Mhm.
seems. And so you say, take a bath, go out for a movie, go out for a nice meal, like live life and lean into some of these rhythms that are your normal daily activities. It makes the time go by faster.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I thought also, prayer has been a big
Hmm.
kind of anchoring rhythm, and it was in my household growing up. My dad, when he was well, when we were growing up, it was non-negotiable that we would have family devotions in the evening. It was just
Yeah.
every day, even when all 5 kids were busy in our activities, whatever time it happened to be that we all came home, dad would lead us in devotions, and we'd take turns leading, and we would just read something out of a book that he had or that had scripture involved, and we would talk about it. So that was a family ritual that really
Hmm.
kept life feeling the same and reliable, even when other things were, because we moved around, but that was one thing that stayed the same.
Yeah.
So that was really anchoring. And journaling, I think, can be a rhythm that's really helpful for people, especially in waiting, because it kind of forces you to name what's going on,
Yeah.
because I think when we're waiting for something or longing for something, at least for me, it feels like if you name it, it feels like you're more at risk for not having that thing. If I just don't even say it, it won't be that big a deal, or I can pretend I don't want it that much.
Yeah.
So naming it, writing about it, praying about it, that can be a good rhythm that keeps it kind of from just being stuffed away.
Yeah, and I think there's also that realizing the stress in your body. So sometimes you wait and it's tense, and the prayer
Mhm.
ritual and rhythm, the journaling, but also body work. Like this week, it's been a good week. It's been a productive week for us, but we haven't been able to walk as much,
Mhm.
and it makes the other pieces harder
Yeah.
when we are waiting or when there's something else because we're out of that rhythm, and it's out of our bodies, right? We're in our heads, and the more we're in our heads and not in our bodies, the worse the waiting is. And so for us, getting back into walking, into
Mhm.
moving, really helps in the other emotional aspects of our
Right, and
life.
just in a very straightforward physical way, it releases some of that tension that can build when you're waiting for something.
Yeah.
You can store a lot of stuff, emotions and tension in your
Mhm.
body that needs to be released, so physical exercise and breath breath work and body work are good for that.
The last rhythm would be talking to somebody. Don't do it on your own, whether it's a therapist, a small group, your partner, a friend. I think the hardest thing is to wait alone. Had a friend who he was having a transplant, and I went and waited with his wife and we played cards and being there joking and playing cards and just doing things, being together, made the time go by so much faster and the anxiety ebb a little bit
Mhm.
versus if you're just sitting in a waiting room alone. And so there's a relational piece that you can build in that would be really, really helpful. A mentor, a therapist, a family member, a religious leader.
Mhm. Yeah, so glimmers are things that have kept me going in lots of seasons of life, whether it's waiting or just harder seasons, is just focusing on the little joys,
Yeah.
the little things that make you smile or make you laugh or remind you that you are growing, like, "Hey, I was more trusting in that." So I see myself growing, like those glimmers of whatever it is that
Yeah.
makes you feel like, life is not all bad.
Yeah.
Good things are happening around me and in me,
Yeah.
and holding on to those and storing them up in your heart.
And I think that's looking for the exceptions too. Like everything is moving slow and I can only focus on this. Well, there's exceptions. Just like I said, my friend said, "Oh, how blessed you are to have your kids around,"
Mhm,
right? The exception is, "Oh, we have more time with them."
mhm.
Which is great. The waiting is for the next stage of life, and that will happen. So, how do we focus on the positive or the opportunities, even in that waiting? Like talking to somebody if you're in line, or yelling at somebody if you're driving the car. And
Nope,
this,
nope.
no, oh, no, 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 that's right. So the other glimmer is just appreciating. So, like you said in therapy, I tell people, as a therapist, I tend to think of people's lives as a book, and I get to be reading one page or maybe two pages with them, and enjoying that part, even though I don't know what the end of the story will be. I'll never know. I mean, a lot of people I've worked with, they go and I never hear, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story.
Mhm,
And that can be really hard and so how do I enjoy the moment that we had?
mhm.
Um, and that can be the glimmer, rather than, oh, but I want to know this. It's like, well, that probably will never happen.
Yeah, yeah,
And occasionally I get a
I know.
postcard and I do get to hear the end of the story.
Yeah.
And those are really special glimmers.
Yeah, those are really nice. Yeah, and for me, a lot of those glimmers come from things that God put that I feel like are little clues in the world and in nature because
Hmm.
he knew life on earth was not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that we take delight in are things he created like, sunrises and birds singing and, whatever it
Yep.
is in nature that delights you. No, not the bagpipes.
Bagpipes. I know it.
God made people who made
Yeah.
bagpipes, but
Well, and like the hummingbird, I see that in giving you delight. It's also been something you've been waiting for.
yes.
Um,
I
but
put out my little hummingbird feeders and I wait and I wait and I hope they'll come find me. And when they do, I am delighted.
it's pure, unadulterated joy. It's so much fun. And so for me, that's a joy of being able to see a little bit of that happen in our relationship.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just drive the relationship piece
Yeah. I
a
mean,
lot.
that's what we believe is kind of the most important thing. And that brings me to the anchors because even those glimmers really are just reminders of where our anchor needs to be because in all of the things that are hard in life, I think we're much more resilient if we're anchored to something bigger than just ourselves and our own feelings about it.
Uh-huh.
We feel lost and anxious when we don't know what we're trying to make meaning out of things.
Yeah.
I think beyond just looking for answers and wanting control as humans, we also want purpose and meaning. And when we're anchored, for us in our faith in God, we're anchored to Him and His story in the world that we get to be a part of, and we get to be one page of,
Yep.
or half a page, or a paragraph, or whatever we are in the big story. But it helps to be anchored to something bigger.
Yeah.
And those glimmers are those reminders. I feel like they're just little reminders that, when you have a moment with your child that makes you so proud of them, or when you see that hummingbird come, it's like reminding you that you're not alone,
Hmm.
that this earth was created for us to enjoy it too, and that we could miss it if
Yeah.
we sit there feeling sad about what we don't have.
Yeah. And we do this, and we just had dinner with a couple that we encouraged of like, what does it look like a year from now, 2 years from now?
Hmm.
Can you dream, right? Of like, yes, it's a waiting time, we're in transition, but do you have a vision
Hmm.
and a heart's desires? Because I think also in our faith, God wants to know what our heart's desire is.
Hmm.
Not just that there's a plan for you and you're going to have it implemented on you, but what gives you joy? How do you kind of focus on that? Like you were focusing on the pregnancy and all you saw was pregnant women.
Hmm.
What if our focus is on kind of desires and goals, and we start to see opportunities for that? That shifts the waiting
Hmm.
from a passive to an active and kind of anchor. So I would say an anchor for me and for our relationship has been looking forward, not holding tightly to like, here's our goal and we're going to drive to it, but this would be great in 5 years if we were here.
Hmm.
And it gives us something to look at while we're in those 5 years. I think the last thing, well, maybe not the last thing, but one of the last things is how do you make meaning of the time that's there? And you were talking about purpose of that. So I think for like your dad in illness, of what was the meaning of it, and without the meaning it was suffering.
Hmm.
With the meaning it was something that he could share around his faith and how he was navigating it, and meaning made the difference of something that was unexplainable and hopeless to something that was meaningful, still difficult, but could demonstrate his relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what we want to know, that that there is some purpose to our life and that we're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think that helps us deal with the waiting. So we hope you find some beautiful glimmers that you can hold on to, and
Some anchors that hold you down.
and some rhythms that keep you moving.